Hi, James Maxwell Supersonic Studios here. Welcome to a Facebook Live video that may or may not end up on my YouTube channel. I have an entire, uh, I have an entire table of Indy whips over here, and we're gonna work through them. That's why I'm wearing the Indy hat today. I just got a new Indy whip. We're gonna talk about that. We're gonna look at that. But let's get started, shall we? So Indy's whip, of course, is absolutely 100% iconic. See, what is the first whip we're going to use today? Here's one. This is an 808 10-foot Indy-esque whip that I commissioned. It has the flare of the Temple of Doom whip. It does have an extra inch in the handle, so it's a 9-inch handle spike. Slightly longer handle, but it works great. This is 10 feet long. Of course, the official length of the Indy whip. One thing that you'll learn really quickly when using longer whips is what I call backblast, and that is your ability to align the whip behind you. I am in a relatively tight, confined space today, so that changes. I actually have a stairwell behind me, but we're going to see what we can do. Over here, you can just see it at the very edge of the frame. That is a Sword Guy Builds. That is a Sword Guy Builds target stand. And I have my favorite target on the far side, which is just some zip ties that are then zip tied and taped to the end. It's nice because I don't have to reset my target stand every time. So this is the 10-foot 808 Indy custom whip that I had commissioned because I wanted, after getting his Indy 4 whip, I wanted to get a 10-foot more in the classic Indy style. So we're going to work. So rolled out absolutely wonderfully. And I no longer have a target piece because I just knocked it out of there. So that is the joy of using a 10-foot whip. There's a lot of power there. And when you throw it right, there is a lot of power there. I want to go see if I cut that or if I just knocked it off. Nope, I cut it. Oh, yeah. So we'll just pretend that it's still there, seeing as I just cut that in half. But really, really nice whip. 808 is amazing, amazing work, and I'm very pleased. Indy whips everywhere. 8-foot Louis Fox whips. Louis, I got to know him early on in my whip cracking, and this whip came to me special. Well, not really special. I had met it earlier when I went to Seattle one year, and then later asked him if it was still around because I got to crack it. I absolutely enjoyed it. It's been a really good whip. For those of you who don't know, David Morgan has cracked this whip and pronounced it good. Therefore, I can never get rid of it. The man himself has cracked this. And it's just been a really good whip. It's 8 feet long, 12 plat. I call it a trilogy whip. There's no official name. It's just an Indiana Jones whip. But it has the handle swell of Temple of Doom, and then it has some of the features of the later whips as well. So kind of a little bit from every single trilogy if you follow Indy whips. This is just a really, really, really pretty whip. It's aged absolutely beautifully, and it has that worn-in look. And this is something that I want to bring up really quickly. It's something that I've been thinking about with my new Indy whip, is that this is the style of whip that Harrison Ford would have received on the set of Raiders of the Lost Ark, because there weren't any new whips to my knowledge for the original movie. They were all whips from Glenn Randall, the stunt coordinator's and whip coach's collection. So they were already well used. One of the big telltales is if you look at the first movie, when he takes the gun, well, he doesn't really take the gun out of the guy's hand. He hits the guy's hand, he drops the gun. Look at the bend off the back of the whip as it comes back, right? Because he takes the whip and he holds it like this. That transition bend is very, very common from what I can tell in early Morgans, and that only happens after a while with those particular whips. So that was a whip that had already been well used, and so that is why, I mean, they look used because they were. This whip looks used because it is. This is probably my most used Indy whip up to this point. So it's been in the sun. It's been drug it everywhere, and it just has that really nice look. This is a Sword Guy builds budget Indy whip, and in my opinion, there's nothing budget about it anymore. If someone's looking for a first whip, whether an Indy whip or just a bull whip in general, I turn them onto the Sword Guy builds economy whip. So I want you to look at this whip real quick. And then let me grab my new whip, and I want you to show you something here. If you're looking for the Indy whip, look at this handle. All right, look at this handle. Almost the same diameter, knots in the exact same position. The plaiting, because of how it's plaited, looks alike. I mean, really, for the price, you're not going to beat it. Why spend money on a custom whip that doesn't work when you want it to? When, you can pick something up like this, it will look the part and it will perform as well. We'll get to this whip in a little bit. I can't say enough good things about this whip. It's become one of my favorites. This is the 8-foot. One of these days I want to pick up one of the 10-foot models, but you can either get it in the short-handed Indy, or I believe his economy whip is slightly longer, but it's the same whip. Highly recommended. This is just a really good, solid whip. People could watch me use whips all day, but we're not going to do that. Amongst other things, is it's really well balanced and it's relatively light, so you can play with it for a long time. Your arm doesn't get tired or worn out. 808 Indy 4. I am super excited. For those of you who don't know, I'm going to go hopefully up to Rancho Andalo over my birthday to speak with Anthony DeLongis, who was instrumental in the design of this particular whip, and also has some of the first batch of the original whips, which are rarer than hen's teeth, hence why I have a nylon one. But I really want to see his feeling on this. And the reason that I got this whip in particular is because this is not just a Morgan clone with different knots. It has that extended transition that Jacket is so known for. And the Jacket I used to own, it feels very similar except for the shorter handle. It's also very, very heavy, and everything that I've read about the Indy 4 is that it's just a beast of a whip, which is what this is. This one doesn't get used too much. But it forms the loop amazingly well. So I'm very, very curious to see what Anthony thinks of this whip. And now for the main event. This is a brand new 1936 Indiana Jones by Midwest Whips, made by Paul Nolan. I don't have a lot to say because anything you think about Indy whips, this whip is. It is designed around the idea that he is building a late 70s, early 80s David Morgan bullwhip. And there are a couple of other makers who do that with an understanding that David Morgan, the shop, no longer makes this whip. David Morgan whips are wonderful whips, but you can also get a quality whip. And in this case, if you're looking for the aesthetic and the construction and design that is that late 70s, early 80s that we all fell in love with when that gentleman reached for his gun. You really can't go wrong with this whip. I've cracked it only a handful of times. So yeah, I'm really excited to get using it. I really want to spend time with Anthony working on the 10-foot Indiana Jones Bullwhips for a little bit and just kind of chat about that, since that is the crux of what so many of us enjoy about whips. Brand spanking new. The action on this whip is unlike any of my other whips. It is sublime. If I could send a feeling over the internet, the feeling I would want to send is how this whip rolls out. It is absolutely just butter smooth. The big thing I have to do is stop treating it like an 8-foot whip and let it take that time to roll out. But really nice. It just, when you roll it, it's beautiful. Really tightly braided. All of the little things he did to make this to that aesthetic, what he calls the rough and tumble, not the thicker cut strands. The modern Morgan that he makes, and also closer to the current Morgans that are being made, they have slightly finer cut strands. You have to remember that the wider strands are designed for wear use, like stuntmen and stuff like that. There's a reason for it. And although David continued to engineer and modify his whip, the more whips he made, at this time it's important to really cool to see that, you know, some of those things are still there. Obviously, the cladding differences. So I'll get my Fox here. So the cladding differences, right? I mean, you know, just really nice work. Really nice work. So one thing about this whip, this Louis Fox whip, when Megan Baldwin, who was still cutting whips for the shop at the time that I went there, when he looked at this, her comment was that Louis tied David knots better than she did. And I thought that was kind of cool. But these are just amazing whips, right? And eventually, hopefully, this one will look like this one. That's the hope. But we'll see. You know, I really like what Anthony says about getting a new whip, and you don't break in a new whip. You train a new whip. You make it learn to do what you want to do, but we don't force it. So there's going to be a lot of hours put on this whip before my birthday, I think, as I try to get this whip a little less new, as it were. So, well, we're going to leave it there. If you have any questions about Indiana Jones whips or whips in general, feel free to throw them down below. I think I will actually post this up on my YouTube channel, just kind of as an aside. If you have questions, you can check us out, Supersonic Studios, at YouTube, and I can answer your questions there too. So until then, practice. Stay safe.